So many seminars, so many writers' workshops, so many documentary projects about storytelling. And storytelling has not changed since caveman scribbling on a wall. Go back to Socrates, Shakespeare, Quentin Tarantino. It's a 3-act play. It's a beginning, middle, and end. And within that beginning, middle, and end, you have to have 3 things to make the story even remotely interesting to said audience. And it's this. Is there an arc? Does Jimmy win the game? Does he get the girl? Does Seabiscuit win? Do they win the Super Bowl? Does the blimp blow up? Do they save it at the last minute? Whatever that arc is. And remember, that arc isn't linear. It's not a matter of Cinderella, the poor floor scrubber, becomes a princess. No, in between, she's abused and she has this highlight of going to the ball, but then carriage turns back into the pumpkin and she goes back to being poor, but then she goes back when the slipper is found. The arc is not linear. It's not, well, Seabiscuit raced and it won. No, it broke its leg in between. There was hassles and it had to overcome. So start with the arc that goes somewhere. 2, the characters have to be interesting. You can hate them. You can be a movie about Hitler where you're rooting against him the whole time. But it has to be characters that are interesting and that say things you relate to. At the same time, they're unusual enough to where you're intrigued by where this is going. So interesting characters. And the third, it's got to be visual. Bottom line, visual. So beginning, middle, and end, story with an arc, not necessarily linear. Characters, richness, texture, sense of place, motion, movement, emotion, intimacy, all things we identify with, but with surprises. And the bottom line is, you got to pull it off visually. Greatest ideas in the world in noon light don't happen. So storytelling, I'm going to make some enemies. I think we spend way too much time on a concept that can be explained in 26 minutes and 9 seconds. Car commercials are 3-act plays. The BMW is going down the road at 900 miles an hour, and the cutaways of them changing gears, then a cutaway of the guy in the mirror, and there's some lady in a red dress hitchhiking a mile down the road, and he stops, and she hops in, and it scoots off. Yeah, buy a $50,000 car and score chicks. It's a little movie, right? It's, I've got a mess. Get me the Brawny. It's clean, and now the kids are happy. It's a 3-act play, even a Brawny commercial. Everybody knows it was a dark and stormy night. This ain't gonna be good. Because the initial setup was a visual reference that something's gonna happen, weather changes, so we know change, and who is going to be within that frame to be altered or survive or flourish in that environment you've just set up. You know, Geographic always does the little town in Massachusetts threatened by growth. It's always a helicopter shot at 500 feet in the fog, right? There's cobblestone streets, and there's a little church spire just peeking through the fog, and you instantly know, yep, it's a small town. It's in New England. I can see Boston way in the background. They do such a good job of giving you an opening scene, like any good movie. You know, 1/3 of what you need to know about the movie is revealed usually in the opening credits. They introduce 4 or 5 characters running around an audience, but they hang on Cindy extra long. Well, you know she's the star because they gave her 18 more seconds of film than the other people. The others were peripheral characters, but once they get to Cindy taking her coffee to the boss, you know the dynamic of those two in the first 60 seconds of dialogue is the movie. When we won the Pulitzer for the Kosovo story, it was really basic. There was 3 of us. One concentrated on the refugee crisis. That was Carol. Lucian Perkins generally concentrated on the involvement of the UN and the US to oust the Serbs and the Yugoslavians. So there was a lot of the Soviet tanks leaving and people leaving, and I did a lot of the aftermath, the atrocities and the deaths and the leveled villages and mass funerals. It was a specific, we're going to explain the war to you. There was these people, they were in this land, and these other people wanted them out, and here's what they did, and here's who did it, and here's how we got them out, and here was the result. Does that sound suspiciously like a beginning, middle, and end? There was a human crisis that needed intervention, part 1. Part 2 was the mess that did it, and part 3 is, well, now we're going to reclaim our country, rebuild. Kosovo is actually recognized as its own entity now, so it has an ending. Welcome to Kosovo. So that Pulitzer, under the guise of just covering spot news, see what happens, When we entered the portfolio, it slyly but sophisticatedly had an arc. One of my final photos was a bunch of Albanians lifting American soldiers saying, "Thank you, America," because we had intervened to help. So the end was they needed help and they got it, and it had real results. The beginning was just massive humanity fleeing. It even had a little mystery. Well, what are they fleeing? Who's shooting at them? Well, Lucian showed you. Well, it was the Serbs, it was this, it was the Nationals. So in the end, subconsciously, we were doing a news story with the traditional arc of a movie or a play.